If you watched my 30-day reading challenge, then you'll know that I wasn't always the most responsible person when it comes to reading business books. I'd read them in mass quantities and either immediately forget everything I learned, or I'd try to implement everything I learned, which always ended in disaster. You simply can't balance a ridiculous blog posting schedule, an Instagram page, a podcast, a YouTube channel, an email list, and all the freebies all at the same time, unless you have a team of people or money to help you out. But that's a video for another day. Let's just say that I've learnt from my mistakes, because I can now read business books effectively, absorbing the relevant information that's right for me, all while not feeling overwhelmed. And I feel like I can say this because I did read 30 books in 30 days back to back. So in this video, I'm going to share my techniques with you, because I believe that reading business books, or books in general, is a great way for you to grow as a business owner. So let's start with the basics. One of the main mistakes I made early on was not picking books that were relevant to me. Reading a business book isn't like reading a fiction book, at least it isn't for me. If you're reading a business book, and by the way, I count personal development as a business book because you're investing in you as a business owner, well then if you're reading a business book, you're likely going to need to absorb and use information later. So when you're picking business books to read, you're going to want to pick ones on topics that you know you're going to get value on and use the information later. The last thing you want to do is pick a book that uses a lot of your mental energy to read and doesn't give you a lot in return. For example, I know that I prefer books that don't focus on traditional business topics like sales and marketing, but instead talk about untraditional methods like deep work, business mindset, and personal development. Make sure you know your business and yourself before you pick the business books you're going to read. This way you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to enjoy reading business books rather than feel overwhelmed by them. Okay, next, and this is really important, I highly recommend you take notes. The idea of taking notes while you're reading feels a bit like we've gone back to university. But by taking notes while you're reading, you'll actually be able to absorb the information better and act on it later because you've written a note on it. This is part of a process called active reading. Active reading simply means reading something with a determination to understand and evaluate it for its relevance to your needs. Essentially, you're looking at the book critically and determining what information within the book is relevant to you and your business. This topic deserves its own video, which I'll be releasing soon. But essentially, you'll want to keep a notepad or a piece of paper with you at all times while you're reading. This way you can write down any thoughts that come to mind while you're reading your book. Make sure you jot down the page number next to the thought so you can read the page again later after you've done reading. I recommend doing this over actually writing physically in the book because you'll have a separate piece of paper that you can reference and expand on later. I'll explain this in more detail in next week's video. Okay, so you've been reading the book that you've carefully handpicked that's relevant to you, and you've been writing notes on the book as you go. The next thing you want to do is either talk to somebody about the book that you've read, or teach somebody else the things that you've learned. As studies have shown, the learning by teaching effect works extremely well. I've used this by talking to friends and family about the books I've read, and teaching you here on YouTube everything that I've learned. By doing this, the techniques I've learned, especially the ones that I've put into videos, have lodged themselves in my mind for when I need them. This would also work really well if you were actually implementing the techniques in your own business yourself, because the act of proactively doing them will lodge them in your mind too. This point goes without saying, but in order to effectively read any kind of book, you need to remove the distractions in the room that you're reading in. Especially when reading business books, a distraction could be the difference between actually absorbing the information you're reading or completely forgetting it. You know, like those times when you reread a sentence or a paragraph over and over again because you keep getting distracted? That's what you need to remove. As much as you possibly can, remove the distractions from the room you're reading in. This means no phone, no clutter, and tell the people that you're living with not to disturb you while you're reading. Reading time is sacred after all. I want to make another point here. It's so important for us as readers to remain objective when we're reading advice-heavy books. The experience you have from reading a business book will probably be different than my experience from the same book. The advice you take from that same business book will probably also be different from the advice I take from the same book. The very important key here is to be objective. Just like when you first picked your business book, you need to understand how you work and your style of business and your goals in order to stay objective with the information you're absorbing from the business book. You need to take on what's relevant to you and completely leave the rest. There's nothing worse than taking on everybody's business advice, implementing it, and then finding out that it doesn't work for you. Trust me, I've been there. Okay, so you tell me, do you have any reading strategies for reading business or non-fiction books? How do you stop feeling overwhelmed while you're reading these books in the first place? I'd love to know, so leave me a comment, and I'll see you next Thursday for another video.